Hi, I'm Craig Taylor, and as always, a huge thank you for joining me here on my YouTube channel, The Bushcraft Padawan. Now, for those of you that have watched my previous video, and I linked to it up here, I talked about the fact that I was going away on a week-long course with Paul Kirtley and the Frontier Bushcraft team to further develop my bushcraft skills, and I said that at the end of each day I would record a small segment of what I've learned, what I've taken away, what I've got out of the day. Well, I failed already because that was yesterday. The course started yesterday evening, quite late yesterday evening. We didn't meet up until 6:30 in the evening in a local pub car park. So what did we do on Sunday the 16th of April? We met up, we got into the camp area, they gave us a great tour around the camp, showed us the teaching area, the hand sanitation area, the washing area, toilets, showers, the kitchen area, the food sort of serving up and preparation area for certain meals, and they gave us a tour around the perimeter of that teaching area and what tracks we could and couldn't use to help reduce the impact on the environment and minimise the number of tracks. We then sat down, we had a meal that they'd prepared for us, which is a chicken stir fry. Top job fellas, thank you. And then Paul came and introduced himself, and we had a sort of around the fire introduction. So not a huge amount covered during day one from a skills perspective, but Paul gave a good insight into how the course would work. It would be long days. He mentioned 70 to 80 hours ish contact time, late finishes, 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, not being uncommon. He also stressed that it wasn't a boot camp and that this wasn't some sort of beasting session. He used the very word beasting. It's not that, but there is a lot to get in. So we're now here at the morning of day 2. I think there's a few people up moving around, so I thought I'd just record this very quick summary of what we did and give you a visual insight into what we did at the very end of a very short day 1. So stay tuned and I'll give you the day 2 recap very, very shortly. So it's the morning of day 2 of the course, I guess you could say. Day 1 was, I guess the first proper day was yesterday, first morning till nighttime day. The day before that was just the evening. We went through a number of things yesterday. We looked at cutting tools, we talked a lot about knives and saws and the different types of cutting tools there are, what's probably more efficient and probably more of use to people working in a UK or a boreal sort of environment. We looked at mechanisms of heat loss. We went out and did a few walks around the area and did some tree and plant ID. We got to practice some basic knife skills and knife safety with carving some tent pegs and a pot hanger that we then utilised later on in the day. We were shown how to pitch a tarp properly, and then we utilised those tent pegs that we'd created. Went back to the main camp area, talked a little bit about mechanisms of heat loss, talked about some very, very basic fire starting skills using a one match method, and then it was down to us in small groups to relocate to a new area, put those tarps up or use those tarps that we'd used earlier on, and cook a meal with some pre-provided beef and vegetables and stock and things like that. I think the biggest learning point for me for the day though was just how long it takes to build even a fairly basic natural debris shelter using no cutting tools, no lashings, just using freestanding sticks and branches interlocking together, and then layers and layers and layers of leaves on top of that. It took the course, the 11 of us, probably the best part of an hour and a half to maybe 2 hours to build a 2-man shelter, probably about 45 minutes to build a 1-man shelter, and that was what with all hands on deck, with all hands chipping in. So biggest learning point was that if you're ever sort of using or you trying to plan and build a debris shelter on your own, it's probably going to take longer than you think, so give yourself plenty of time to do it. So that's the recap from day 1 proper. Let's get stuck into day 2. So day two I'm classing as the second full day of the course, so it actually worked out to be a Tuesday the 18th of April. What did we cover? Well, the answer is a hell of a lot. We looked at, we had a quick refresher in the morning of some tree and plant ID from the previous day to get the old cogs turning. We looked at fire, we looked at methods of ignition, we looked at all sorts of different tinders, different sorts of natural tinders, and considered the specifics such as specific lichen and specific tree bark, and then we looked from a more holistic perspective at the nature of good natural tinder rather than looking at specifics, which was a useful exercise, very useful exercise. We did some more tree and plant ideas. We walked around for a fair while. We found some pignut, which I was pleased to see, because we've been looking at that in the tree and plant identification masterclass. I'll link to it up here, a playlist of videos that I've created. We've been talking about it in there, and I've been always fascinated to try and find it and eat some. I didn't manage to eat any, but we did find it, so I feel far more confident about foraging for that in some of my local woodland moving forward. We then had a really in-depth look at friction fire and fire by friction, and we spent pretty much the rest of the daylight hours looking for good bow drill materials, discussing what made a good and poor bow drill materials. We then actually started to fashion it, and by the end of the day I'd managed to get the spindle, the bearing block and the half and the bow constructed. We then got given our evening meal, and each of the evening meals, bar the first night, we've been cooking ourselves, practicing different cooking techniques, different fire techniques. Sometimes we've needed really hot embers, other times we've needed a more direct flame. On some occasions we've needed both at the same time, so that's been interesting about how to create a fire layout to allow you to cook two different meal types using two different heat types all at the same time. And yesterday evening we had fish with some nettles and with some rice. What did I learn from that? I learned that it's really hard to cook. I find it quite hard to cook fish over the fire. It might because there were 4 fish over the fire, relatively small fire. Maybe just with one person you've got the luxury of the free space and being able to put your fish exactly where you wanted it. Biggest takeaway from day 2, for me, it was very definitely the bow drill. I've looked at so many videos of people creating them. I've tried to fashion them myself with limited success, but it was really good to be able to spend many hours looking at the material types, fashioning them, receiving a demo on them. So our biggest takeaway, which was one of the things that I wanted to get from this entire experience, was really being able to hone in on bow drill. So what did we look at on day 3, which was the 19th of April 2017? Once again, packed a hell of a lot into the day. We did more tree and plant ID refresher in the morning. We then proceeded to burn in the bow drills that we'd built the day before. Now some people had burnt them in the day before, I hadn't, so myself and a few other people started to burn them in that morning. Hard going. I'm doing something wrong, because it was a struggle to even burn it in, let alone do any of the following stages that I saw some people get to. So struggling a little bit with the bow drill. We then touched a lot on sharpening the knives and sharpening our tools, with a particular focus on knives. We looked at oil stones, we looked at whetstones, we looked at stropping, and that was something that it wasn't one of my key takeaways. It wasn't one of the things that I really wanted to get out of this, but actually once we started to talk about it, I realised that I'm bloody terrible at knife sharpening. I think I've dulled and ruined more knives than I've actually had a positive effect on. So it was really good to be covering that. We then looked at carving. We spent a lot of the day looking at different woods for carving, what works well, what doesn't, and we started to carve out some spoons. We started to create some spoons. And mine was pretty crummy, but you know, all the same, it was a good activity, and it wasn't necessarily the spoon, the creation of the spoon, that was important. Moreover, it was the fine knife skills. It was realising how to cut with grain, how to cut against grain, how to manipulate the wood, how to manipulate the knife around the wood to create things. The spoon was just a vehicle for doing that. So our biggest takeaway of the day was most certainly the knife sharpening. It's something I've not been good at, so I'm really pleased that we covered it, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we're going to cover on day 4. Day 4, the 20th of April 2017. What did we look at yesterday? We looked at, we revised fire lighting materials. We'd looked at them earlier on in the week, so we looked back at those and talked about specific types and specific names of woods and lichen that would work, but also just the general properties around them. We revisited what would make, you know, good fire material and poor fire material. We then started to actually, or I started to actually attempt to get an ember from friction fire using a bow drill, and was significantly unsuccessful. Found it really, really hard to do. Certainly started to generate dust and certainly started to generate smoke, but just didn't have the technique to be able to continue that. And I think also having full knee operations and it involving a lot of kneeling down and applying pressure on the knees as well didn't help matters. So I'm really hoping that I can iron that out as the week goes on. We then packed most of our gear up and we relocated a kilometre, maybe a couple of kilometres away, and set up for an overnight in a new location. We talked through gathering some natural cordage, and we went foraging just under the surface around some pine trees, some needle trees, to gather some very thin roots from the root system to be able to affect some natural cordage. And then we did some more tree and plant ID as we were wandering between that location and our relocation area. So Paul's always trying to weave in the tree and plant ID wherever we are. If he sees something that he thinks will be useful to us, we stop and we talk about it and we identify it. We also had a lecture that late afternoon on water purification, different types, different processes for purifying water, why we need to process it and purify it. And we then went on to craft a very primitive fish hook. Now I'm a fisherman, and I looked at the size of that fish hook and I thought, ye gods, what the hell is this going to catch? It was massive. It was big compared to some of the fish hooks that I use for match and coarse fishing. But they explain that these are often used when canoeing. They troll behind the actual boat itself with some bait on and hopefully attract some salmon, which are a very large predatory fish. So I understand why the hooks are as big as they are. So we started to craft those, and that was it for day 4. Biggest takeaway of the day, I would say, was the cordage. That was one of the things that I wanted to get out of this experience. I've been caught out in the past where I ran out of man-made cordage. So I'm really pleased that we covered that, and I actually found it, fortunately, I found it quite easy. I think I fell upon a tree that had a very good root system that lent itself to it, so I enjoyed creating that natural cordage. I'm going to look forward to seeing what we can make out of that as the week progresses. Well, day 5 is over and done with. Day 5 was the 21st of April 2017. It covered a hell of a lot in this day as well. It packed such a lot into the days, it's brilliant. Got up, had breakfast, got straight on with trying to affect my bow drill. I'd struggled for several hours the day before and had nothing. So I had the bit between my teeth, and I achieved it. I was really, really pleased. At first, Paul applied some pressure onto the top of my bearing block for me, and I achieved an ember from that. But I wanted to do it on my own. I wanted to have the beginning to end experience without any assistance from anyone else. And what I did was I actually swapped out my bearing block. I had a relatively small bearing block to begin with, and I swapped it out for a much larger piece, and found that, for me, at that point in time, that was the variable that needed to change. And I got a bow drill, I got an ember relatively quickly and blew it into flame, and was so chuffed. That was one of the 3 things that I wanted to take away from this week. One was more tree and plant ID, the other was natural cordage, which we covered yesterday or the day before, and the third one was affect fire by bow drill, and I did it. So really, really chuffed. I couldn't stop shaking Paul's hand. I was so chuffed that I'd managed to do that, and I just hope I can replicate it when I need to in the future. We then talked a little bit about field sharpening our knives, and we looked at the DC4 sharpening stones, and Paul gave a demonstration about how to use that when you're away from your base location with probably the larger stones. We spent quite a bit of time, understandably, talking about leaving no trace, how to make it look as much as possible that you've never been there, how to make sure that your fire is fully doused, and that it limits the likelihood of any fire starting when you leave. We then got back to the teaching area, and the guys had a couple of very, very large salmon, and they showed us how to prepare that salmon and panace it. And whilst that was cooking, we went away and we looked for decent wood to create feather sticks, and we had to go at creating feather sticks. And whilst we were doing that, the salmon was cooking, and they served up an amazing salmon and a salad, a couscous type salad with that salmon. So that was a good experience, seeing that go from being a proper fish to being on my plate whilst cooked outside in a very unusual but effective way. It's a good experience. We carried on doing feather sticks after lunch, and once we'd done them, we created a tier of them on top of one another, and we as a team lit that fire using a one match only technique. So it was good to be able to see using feather sticks to affect fire when the wood may be absolutely soaked on the outside. You can then take something from its core and do something good with it to create a fire. We then went and did a little bit of primitive fishing. There's a still water relatively close to where I'm stood right now. I must admit, I looked at it and thought there's no chance that's got anything in it. There's even less chance that we're going to catch it using just a primitive hobo reel that we actually created there and then on site. Probably took about 7 or 8 minutes to create it. I thought there's no chance of catching anything, and lo and behold, first casting, I actually caught a small perch, and several other people around this pond were catching some roach and perch and some small rudd. So I need to eat my hat on that occasion, because it definitely worked. We came back, we looked at preparing small game, and in this case it was a rabbit. I've done this before many times, so you know, it was good at last to actually be doing something that I felt very comfortable in and didn't struggle with. So that was good. That all got put into a pot. We carried on looking at and working on some of the projects we'd been given whilst that was cooking. And then after we'd had our tea, it was quite late. Paul talked about the UK laws around snaring and trapping, in particular rabbits, but we also touched on squirrels as well, and he gave a demonstration of how to create a snare, how to hand make a snare using some man-made materials, not just from natural materials. A very, very late finish last night, and we went to bed with the sound of, not an assessment, Paul was keen to stress it's not an assessment, but we've got a number of tasks that we need to be able to demonstrate today, and some underpinning knowledge that we need to be able to demonstrate today. So yeah, as I'm stood recording this right now, it's the final day, or 3/4 of a day of a course. We've got a number of tasks that we need to tick off, so I'm going to stop recording now. I'm going to head back over there to the parachute area, and I'm going to start getting my breakfast together and looking forward to these tasks. Day 6 of the course, or the final day of the course, if you were. That was Saturday the 22nd of April 2017. Not a full day. We started around 8:30, we finished at 4 o'clock and got in our cars and went, but we packed a hell of a lot into those remaining hours. What we did at the very beginning of the day was we had something of, and I use this word very loosely, an assessment. Paul took great time to explain that it wasn't a test, it wasn't an assessment, it wasn't a pass or fail, it wasn't a judgment on our skills or character or anything like that. It was much more of a self-diagnostic test to give us, the participants, an idea about where we may wish to go and concentrate on once the course was finished. We started off with a tree and plant identification, and we passed around lots of trees and plants and cones and needles and things and attempted to identify them. I think I scored 18 out of 25, something like that. And unsurprisingly, my plant identification was poorer than my tree identification. And I'm not surprised at that, to be perfectly honest. We then went on and did something of a theory test around some of the skills and practices and processes and underpinning theory that we talked about during the week. And then we went on to what was, I think was the main focus of the assessment, which was some practical skills. We had 3 hours to do a number of tasks. We had to use our bow drill to create an ember and blow it into flame. Really pleased to say that I was the first person to do that on the day, despite struggling somewhat earlier on in the week. So I was really pleased about that. We had to show off the crafts that we'd made, the spoon, the cordage, the fish hook, and we got some feedback on those. Also had to create 6 feather sticks, use 1 match to light those feather sticks, create a fire and boil, or bring a litre of water to a rolling boil, which I did. And there were also some other tasks which escape me right now. I've had a sleep since the course finished, but all in all, it was a frenetic 3 hours with everybody head down, beavering away at the tasks that they'd been given. And I think, I might be wrong, and I think the vast majority of people completed all of the tasks within the time. So, fair effort to everybody that was on the course. If you're watching this, wherever you got in that assessment, there was certainly a lot of pressure on. It was certainly a very busy morning, so well done. We then spent the rest of the day, we had some lunch, and we spent the rest of the day leaving as little trace as we possibly could in the areas that we'd been bivvying up in. We tidied up the main teaching area as much as we possibly could, and we helped Paul prep slightly for the next course that he was starting in about 24 hours time. And that was the end of the course. We all sort of waved each other goodbye and swapped address details, and off we went. I want to say a really big thank you to everybody that took part in the course, from Paul and the team at Frontier Bushcraft, to all of the people that were in the team that we sort of self-formed. There was myself, there was Jim, there was Jamie, and there was Richard. A really big thank you to all of them, particularly to those 3 other guys as well. We had a great week. I think we worked well as a team, and I'm hoping that you guys will keep in touch. Once I've had time to process all this, I'm still very much buzzing at the moment. Once I've had time to process all this, I'm going to do a follow-up video just reflecting on what I took away from it on a more longer term perspective. But that for now, the course is over. I'm going to go and get some sleep. I'm going to go and wash my very grubby, filthy hands, and I'm going to crack on with hopefully putting all of this into practice when I go away and doing some, just being jogged by a dog here, when I go away and do some of my overnighters and my days out in the future. What can I say? I'm buzzing. It was an immense experience. I won't go into it in too much detail now. That's not the purpose of this video. But hopefully you've enjoyed what you've watched in this video. Hopefully it's inspired you to go out and perhaps, you know, look at Frontier Bushcraft, look at what Paul's writing about and recording videos about, maybe getting on one of their future courses. But if it's done nothing, if it hasn't done that, then hopefully you've just enjoyed seeing and hearing what myself and 10 other blokes have been up to in the woods for a week. Very dodgy. If you like the video, give it the usual thumbs up. If you want to keep track of what I'm doing in the future, do click on that subscribe button. It should be just down here somewhere, and hopefully I'll see you in a future video. Thanks for watching.